Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza and Khan Yunis killed dozens.
Footage obtained by Reuters of the aftermath shows children covered in grey dust amid crumbled cement and rubble from collapsed buildings.
Plus, a U.S. warship is forced to take defensive actions in the Red Sea.
After that, the Carney saw a drone being launched from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen, and so the Carney shot that down as well.
And later, a look at the role of social media in the Israel-Hamas conflict and its potential to build bridges. Plus, the latest from Kyiv on Ukrainian soldiers allegedly executed by Russian forces. Today is Monday, December 4th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. Plumes of smoke were seen rising over the Gaza skyline as blast sounds echoed near the border area of Israel and the Gaza Strip on Monday morning. Israeli forces bombed wide areas of Gaza, killing and wounding dozens of Palestinians as civilians sought shelter in an ever-shrinking area of the south. Particularly hard hit were the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. Reuters' Lauren Anthony has more.
Israeli forces bombed wide areas of the Gaza Strip on Sunday. The Jabalia refugee camp in the north of the Hamas-run enclave was among the sites hit. A Gazan Health Ministry spokesperson said several people were killed by an Israeli airstrike there. Footage obtained by Reuters of the aftermath shows children covered in grey dust amid crumbled cement and rubble from collapsed buildings. These children are crying out in search of their father. One of them says he is dead. Civilians in the besieged territory have been seeking shelter in an ever-shrinking area of the south. Residents say bombardment from warplanes and artillery has concentrated on the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. They add that hospitals are struggling to cope. The following graphic images from the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis show bloodied casualties, including children, being rushed to the medical complex for treatment. People could be seen crying next to casualties laid out on the hospital floor. This man says he was outside a school when a rocket hit a house nearby. He brought a young boy to the hospital, but he says he died in his arms. There was no immediate comment from Israel on the reported actions. The violence took place despite calls from the United States, Israel's closest ally, for Israel to avoid further harm to Palestinian civilians. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry said more than 15,520 have been killed in nearly 2 months of warfare.
That's Reuters' Lauren Anthony reporting for us. The military conflict between Israel and Hamas has entered a new phase, according to an Israeli army spokesman, adding that the military will be pursuing the armed group throughout the Gaza Strip while trying to minimize harm to civilians. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari is a spokesperson for the Israeli army.
We have entered a new phase in our war against Hamas. Hamas broke the humanitarian pause when it violated the hostage release agreement by refusing to release women, children, and babies as agreed. Hamas also fired rockets at Israeli homes. It should be clear to everyone by now, Hamas chooses war. Hamas chose war when it broke the hostage release agreement on December 1st.
Meanwhile, a Lebanon-based Hamas official, Osama Hamdan, told a press conference in Beirut on Sunday that there are no safe areas in the Gaza Strip.
About the occupation's renewed aggression on the Gaza Strip, it has become clear that the occupation's claim since the start of its aggressive war of the existence of safe areas in the south of the Strip and its constant call for citizens to go there was a premeditated plan to trap and commit more massacres against our people, unarmed civilians, and displaced people in the south. There are no safe areas, nor in the north of Gaza Strip, nor in the south, nor in any other areas.
All this as Senator Bernie Sanders and a group of Democratic senators say they're done, quote, asking nicely for Israel to do more to reduce civilian casualties in its war against Hamas in Gaza. The lawmakers are warning President Joe Biden's national security team that planned U.S. aid to Israel must be met with assurances of concrete steps from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hard-right government. Now, it's highly unlikely that Congress would vote down the wartime aid, and the Democratic senators are adamant that that is not their intent, as they also say they're strong supporters of Israel's right to self-defense against Hamas. But the mere fact that pressure is building shows the fractures in Congress as the aid debate drags on. Now, even as Israel and Hamas are not yet willing to return to the negotiating table to resume a temporary ceasefire, Israel says it's trying to minimize civilian casualties as it continues its military offensive in Gaza. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports.
After Israel renewed bombardments in Gaza against Hamas targets, several Palestinian families gathered Sunday at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir el-Balah to mourn the latest victims of the military offensive, as many prayed for the dead and others continued to flee. The United States affirmed that Israel is heeding its calls to minimize civilian casualties. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby appeared on ABC's This Week program.
They published online a map of places where people could go to avoid combat. There's not a whole lot of modern militaries that would do that. I mean, to telegraph their punches in that way. So they are making an effort.
But Israel and Hamas are still reluctant to negotiate a new truce and the release of more hostages.
It fell apart because Hamas was unwilling and refused to come up with additional lists of women and children, which we know they are holding, and put them on the list so that Israel could evaluate that and we could get them exchanged.
A recently published report by the New York Times points to Israel knowing in advance and playing down Hamas's plan to carry out the October 7th terrorist incursion. The questions that the article raises, however, will need to be answered at a later time, Ron Dermer, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, told ABC.
After the war, we're going to have a serious investigation. It's very important during a war to unite all the forces to achieve a common goal, which we all have, which is to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, to end its political rule in Gaza, and to ensure that Gaza doesn't represent a threat to Israel, and also to return the hostages.
In Dermer's view, destroying Hamas will open the door to regional peace.
And in the context of that regional peace, we'll have to figure out how we can put ourselves on a path towards an ultimate political settlement with the Palestinians.
Meanwhile, he added, Israel agrees with the United States on the need to reduce civilian casualties in Gaza and to ramp up humanitarian assistance. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Missiles fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen targeted commercial ships in the Red Sea on Sunday, while a U.S. warship shot down 3 drones in self-defense. For more, I'm joined by VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb.
Yes, it was a very busy weekend in the Red Sea. There were 3 vessels that came under attack, 3 commercial vessels that came under attack. First, the MV Unity Explorer sent out a distress signal, and there was an anti-ship ballistic missile that was heading in their direction. And so the USS Carney military vessel took that out. After that, the Carney saw a drone being launched from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen, and so the Carney shot that down as well. They're not 100% of who was the target of that drone. It could have been the Carney. The Carney was near the Unity Explorer. It could have been the Unity Explorer. We don't know. The Pentagon is saying that they don't think the Carney was the target, but they are leaving that open. After that, just a minutes later, the Unity Explorer sends out another signal saying that it was struck by a missile from Yemen. And when the Carney went to help them out, there was some minor damage. Hours later, another commercial vessel, the MV number 9, was struck by a missile fired from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. And then at about an hour after that, the MV Sophie sent out a distress call saying that that ship was struck by a missile. The USS Carney again responded to their distress calls. And so it's clear that with all of these attacks, there's a feeling of escalation in this already tense region.
Now, Carla, we know that the Houthi rebels are backed by Iran. Do we have any idea if these attacks on these ships were ordered by the Iranians, or if the Iranians even knew what was going to happen?
Well, Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh just spoke to reporters, and she said that the Pentagon blames Iran and holds Iran to account for these attacks. She called these actions incredibly irresponsible, bad for commercial vessels everywhere. And it not only is it irresponsible, it's very concerning because with everything going on in the region, they don't want this war to escalate.
Do we expect any retaliation for these missile launches at sea?
We will have to wait and see in the coming days. I mean, there has been a response in the past. It was several years back where the U.S. was able to strike back at Houthi rebels in Yemen. I believe it was 2016. The U.S. launched Tomahawk cruise missiles that destroyed 3 coastal radar sites in Houthi-controlled territory in retaliation for missiles that had been fired at U.S. Navy ships, including the U.S. Mason, which is currently back in the Red Sea. But with the Pentagon saying that the USS Carney, the USS Mason, that they haven't been directly targeted so far, it's still unclear if we're going to see a direct response from the U.S. military. However, like I said before, they are leaving that open, so we will have to keep monitoring the situation.
VOA's Pentagon correspondent, Carla Babb. Carla, thank you for your reporting.
You're welcome.
One of Israel's stated goals in its war with Hamas was to secure the release of all the hostages taken on October 7th. During last week's pause in the fighting, many hostages were indeed released. An Israeli-Argentine mother and her 2 young daughters are among those released by Hamas. While their family rejoices in their safe return, they're still anxious about the father, who remains in captivity. Pilar Cebrian spoke with the family, who shared details about their ordeal. Veronica Villafana narrates the story.
As he leaves Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, Israel, Diego Engelbert is relieved and content. He has just seen his sister Karina Engel for the first time in weeks. She, along with her daughters Mika and Yuval, were taken hostage by Hamas during the October 7 attacks on Israel.
We didn't talk. We hugged. For 5 minutes I held her. I hugged her very tightly.
Engelbert says his sister shared with him some details about her time in captivity.
A basement, a large room. The room had a floor, but everything was muddy and dirty.
He says his sister lost 11 kilos during her 7 weeks in captivity and that the hostages received little food and were held in underground tunnels.
On a given day, they would get a small piece of bread and cheese and others a little bit of rice. They remained hungry all day long.
Now out of captivity and safe, Karina's youngest daughter is finally getting the medical attention she has needed since the attack.
Yuval, the 11-year-old, had to undergo an operation when she was kidnapped and they were taking them to Gaza. She was possibly hit by a bullet fragment in the leg and she must be operated on.
The family lived in kibbutz Nir Oz, about 5 kilometers away from the Gaza border. The father, Ronen Engel, remains a hostage. His brother, Danny Engel, describes what happened on the day of the attack.
My brother had a weapon, and my brother went out with his weapon, and we don't know anything else after that when he went out, because Karina wrote to a friend that Ronen is out, she don't know where he is, and we don't know exactly what happened to him.
It has been nearly 2 months since the attack, and while 104 hostages have been released, an estimated 143 are still being held by Hamas. For Pilar Cebrian in Tel Aviv, Israel, Veronica Villafana, VOA News.
And now for a look at how we talk about the war. Social media posts from the actual and ideological battlefields of the Israel-Hamas war have been polarizing for some young people in the United States, at times leading to threats or violence. But some groups see the growing tension as an opportunity for dialogue. VOA's Anthony Labruto reports.
Throughout the Israel-Hamas war, social media has captured all the latest developments and opinions. But in the United States, all that unfiltered information provided without context can be confusing and misleading, particularly among politically minded young adults. Brandon Leach is an American university student and the vice president of the campus network for the American Jewish Committee.
Everybody is just bombarded by a lot of anti-Semitic or pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli content online. It's like all I get on Instagram Reels, and that can take a mental toll. I would say also, like, it's a really scary situation to be in as a young student.
On Washington area college campuses, students are finding others who share their views, whether they be pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. Israelis and Palestinians alike have converged on the National Mall to express outrage, says Taher Herzala, the director of outreach and grassroots at the American Muslims for Palestine.
Our community here, Palestinian American community, as you can see in the thousands, people have come out to express their outrage.
Since Hamas militants attacked Israelis on October 7th, resulting in 1,200 deaths, many social media posts and mainstream media reports have focused on Israel's siege of Gaza, which has resulted in the deaths of over 14,000 people, according to figures from the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. Such a focus on Gaza may explain data from the video streaming platform TikTok that showed videos with the hashtag #FreePalestine outnumbered those with the hashtag #StandWithIsrael by 2.9 million as of November 13th. But TikTok itself warns that such blunt comparisons of hashtags are severely flawed and lack needed context. But other research has shown that sympathy for Palestine among millennials had been growing before October 7th. TikTok points to Pew Research data gathered between 2006 and 2016 that shows older generations, who are likely less present on the app, were more likely to sympathize with Israel than younger generations. Some young people see this taking of sides online as an opportunity for connection. Max Katz and Fareed Abdibi started Left Middle Right, a digital media organization at George Washington University's campus that aims to help college students and other young people articulate their thoughts.
And I'm sure there are people radicalized on both sides, but the majority are just more involved and are more reflective of who they are and where their roots are. And if both sides just really sat in a room, let's say GW for Israel and Students for Justice in Palestine, and they talked for an hour, they'd realize that, like, they don't hate each other. They don't have an issue with their belief system. It's just a matter of their identities that clash at a geopolitical stage.
Meetings like this can provide a type of online ceasefire between groups radicalized by the internet, even as those between Israel and Hamas remain tenuous. Anthony Labruto, VOA News, Washington.
You're listening to Flashpoint Global Crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. An update from Kyiv in just a moment. First, though, a look at the conflict in Washington over funding for aid to Kyiv. U.S. funding for Ukraine may soon come to an end. A divided Congress has so far failed to approve a long-term budget for the United States government, let alone new money for aiding allies mired in conflicts abroad. The country's top defense official says that's a mistake. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has the story.
Sunday in Kherson, Ukraine, officials report 1 fatality and 7 injuries after Russian shelling in the region. Just days earlier in the Donetsk region, at least 10 injuries and 1 fatality in a 6-missile attack were reported. Ukraine's interior minister said Russian forces fired into the territory. Russia's invasion of Ukraine appears headed into a 3rd year. Ukraine's government continues pressing allies for financial and material support, but in the United States, that may soon come to an end. Congress has yet to appropriate a long-term measure to fund the federal government, instead passing a short-term measure called a continuing resolution lasting just into the new year. Top military brass say that jeopardizes national security while urging Congress to pass a full-year financial appropriation. United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
That's the single best thing that Congress can do to strengthen our national defense. You know, our competitors don't have to operate under continuing resolutions, and so doing so erodes both our security and our ability to compete. And I also urge you to pass our urgent supplemental budget request to help fund our national security needs, to stand by our partners in danger, and to invest in our defense industrial base.
Failure to pass a long-term spending plan may have serious implications for continued wartime support for both Ukraine and Israel, a fact not lost on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In a recent interview, Zelensky said Ukraine must not allow the world to forget that, like Israel, his country is fighting for its survival, and doing so before a winter phase of combat sets in. At the ongoing UN Climate Conference, or COP28, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the clear message from NATO allies was continued support for Ukraine.
So it will be a big tragedy for the Ukrainians if President Putin wins, but it will be dangerous also for us, because the message that he and other authoritarian leaders then will get is that when they use military force, when they invade another country, when they violate international law, they get what they want.
The comment comes amid the extended detention of Russian-American reporter Alsu Kurmashiva. She is a Prague-based journalist working for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which, like Voice of America, receives its funding from the U.S. Congress. Russia has charged her with failing to register as a foreign agent, a throwback to Cold War-era espionage. Back in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region, police bring residents small stoves donated by the Netherlands. In a mostly elderly community that has refused to leave despite no electricity, gas, or water, these stoves could be the lifeline for cooking and warmth as another winter at war sets in. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
It was a tough weekend in Ukraine, with Russian attacks in Kherson striking 2 hospitals. Shelling continued on Monday. Flashpoint Ukraine host Lori London speaks with Anna Chernikova in Kyiv for the latest.
On Monday, the shelling of the region continued, and Russian forces attacked the city of Kherson and surrounding area, killing 1 more civilian and wounding 4 civilians. This time, 2 private buildings were hit and a gas pipe was damaged in the region. It was also confirmed by the local authorities that Russian army shelled a kindergarten in the city of Kherson. As a result of this shelling, 1 kindergarten worker was injured. And again, the shelling was conducted from the occupied area of the region.
Also, we're hearing reports that Ukrainian officials have launched an investigation into allegations that Russian forces killed Ukrainian soldiers that were surrendering, and that apparently they were shot at close range. Are you hearing anything about that?
At this point, there is information coming from Ukrainian military that on December 2nd, a video of the execution of the surrendered Ukrainian soldiers appeared online by the deep state media source, showing that Russian soldiers were basically executing Ukrainian soldiers who surrounded in the area of the village of Stepove in the Donetsk region. According to preliminary information, this location was confirmed, but again, we cannot verify this information independently at this point. The armed forces of Ukraine also confirmed that investigation of this event is ongoing. And then later on December 3rd, the head of Avdiivka city military administration in the Donetsk region said that Russian soldiers who executed unarmed Ukrainian soldiers were killed at the battlefield during the hostilities. He also added that the fact of the shooting of prisoners of war was reported by the relevant services and was recorded by the relevant services of Ukraine, and the criminal proceedings have been initiated already, and also that these materials will be then handed over to the international institutions dealing with war crimes.
Anna Chernikova reports.